Hi, I'm Senthil Palaniappan. I'm President and CEO of Sennovate. And Dan, welcome to our Secure Insights. And we are great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Senthil. It's wonderful to be with you this morning.
Wonderful. I've read your books and then a lot of accolades, and you have a long introduction. In this podcast, we I really expect the viewers to get a lot of good things. Especially, I see that your services predominantly for the cybersecurity leaderships and then government organizations, and it's not necessarily Fortune 500, but all the companies can make the best out of your knowledge and your experience here. So the podcast is like we have three parts. I like you always say, like, part one with the before Mayday, and the second one is Mayday impact and how you prepare after that. To start with the first part here, so maybe we can start with this, like, I know that you have a depth of knowledge, but here, what are the key steps a leader should take to prepare for a potential cyber mayday in an organization?
Thank you for asking, and I just want the listeners to know the ideas are coming from the book Cyber Mayday and the Day After, which is a book that I co-authored with Shemaine Tan from Sydney, Australia, and really stories from all over the world around ransomware and cyber attacks, data breaches. I think leadership needs to first recognize that this is really a business risk issue. Yes, of course, there's technology components to it. It involves people, process, and technology, but it's really, you need to basically attack this problem in the same way you would other business risks, and really starts off with having a plan, an incident response plan. That's got to include many different components, and we walk through some templates in that in the book and different aspects of what that looks like. It's called different things by different organizations. In Michigan government, we wrote what's called a cyber disruption response strategy. Obviously it's different if it's just with your company than it is like a sector-wide emergency or a major blackout or something that hit critical infrastructure would be very different than something that just hits your individual company. But thinking through various scenarios, thinking through various challenges that companies face, and you need to make sure in that plan you have the executive buy-in. People know what their roles and responsibilities are, and so who's involved in that. That includes, your of course your technology team, your incident response team around emergency management, the same way you might respond to a fire, flood, tornado, natural disaster. Your finance organization, your CFO, your chief financial officer, the legal team, your lawyers, and basically knowing that all of your legal aspects are taken care of. Your communications team, your public officers that deal with how to deal with the media, communicating with those, we call them public information officers in government, PIOs, but they're called different things in Fortune 500 companies. And by the way, I have worked with a lot of different Fortune 500 companies. I do that now in my role with Presidio, and governments as well, all over the world, and especially in the United States. And then you need to really be having a communication plan. How are you gonna communicate during an emergency? You can't just assume that your smartphone is going to be available. Phones may be down, connectivity may be down. Have some alternatives that you can use in different types of emergencies. Don't just rely on email. Email may be down. Your networks may be down. So having alternatives for various scenarios. And then training and tabletop exercises. I know we're going to talk about that some more in upcoming questions, but making sure that whatever your plan is, that you practice that plan. People know where to go, they know what to do, and then you practice that, and then you're ready, should an emergency hit your organization.
Wonderful. That's a nice summary. That's well said. Like, it is a responsibility of every individual, but you need to have a right communication plan, and preparedness is very important. That is well said. So along with that, what role do external partners and vendors play in leaders' preparations for a cyber mayday, and how can they be effectively engaged and managed? How you can help us on that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And industry partners are vital, and there's all different types of partners that we have. I mentioned some of them, and I often say to people, you can outsource the function or the job, but you can't outsource the responsibility. So as you mentioned, the leadership is still going to need to be, involved in this. But, whether it be something like cyber insurance, if you have an insurance policy, which, many organizations do, making sure that you understand, is that retainer in place? So all the legal language is in place, the contract is in place. You don't want to be going through the legalese and the paperwork in the midst of a ransomware attack. You want to have that done in advance. So you really want to be having a retainer in place, even if it's a $0 retainer, or if you have, better yet, a function in place so you can call for help if you need it. Knowing how you can work with your technology companies, that might be your disaster recovery, your business continuity plans. So the different partners that are helping you do those functions, as far as backups and recovery, making sure you have good backups, and again, working, and there's again a whole conference is just on that topic, obviously, but looking at making sure your backups are immutable, that they can't be changed, and that those backups are in fact available, and you've actually practiced restoring data, and you can do that fast. One of the biggest challenges people have in emergencies is I've got good backups, but then they discover, to restore everything to where we need to do and to rebuild things. Hopefully you don't have to do that. But if you do, it could take weeks or months, and they can't have the business down for that long. So making sure that people know what their roles and responsibilities are in an emergency. When you have tabletop exercises and things, making sure that they're part of those, that they're really part of one, team that working together, and that they're ready to go. There are various roles and responsibilities that private sector companies can have. Sometimes, you can have a managed service that, whereby they literally oversee the day-to-day interaction. When threats come in, they see that real time, and they're responding within seconds, all the way to, your organization being that group that responds. So it really kind of depends upon what that relationship is with the provider. Are they providing an overall service? Are they just providing a technology, or just people, making sure people are available, and having backups? I'm just saying that not just backups with data, but with people, because in the story I'm going to tell in a moment, a lot of times certain people you thought were going to be available may not be available. So you need to know that, you've got, if certain individuals are not available in an emergency, that you can get in touch with different providers.
Excellent. I think it's clearly said that, how do you align your vendors and partners, not only with that, and then how do you make it the preparedness of it, and also make sure that everybody understands their ownership, accountability, and how they react in terms of emergency, and who does what. That's excellent. That's very clear. Thank you. Along that line, right? I was like, a lot of Maydays could have happened in the past. Basically, as a leader, right, how we use the learned lesson from the past Mayday events to continuously improve their organization's preparedness and response capabilities.
To start on that question with a little story from the book, and I'm going to, each of these sections, we're going to do 3 parts. I'm going to have one story that I can tell that's a true story from the book. Read this, take a minute or two, but just, I think, lead by example. And I think the first way you can do it is by talking with your peers, knowing the others in the industry, and what have they actually been through. And I think we often do that at a very high level. And obviously this conversation is at a pretty high level today, but really understanding, what does it really look like for someone in your role? And that, your role may be a technology role, but it may be a CEO, maybe a CFO, maybe some other organization, chief legal counsel, and what happened to them during a ransomware attack. So really understanding what really happens. So let me read this story from chapter 5 of the book. It says this: your network has been locked. You need to pay $30 million now. The following was an actual real life negotiation between a ransomware gang and a $15 billion US victim company that was hit with a $28.75 million ransomware demand in January of 2021. After a few rounds, the victim company countered with a $2.25 million offer, which was met with a scornful response by the ransomware criminals. Then I paraphrase what they said here. It's very funny to watch a few of your admins trying to install MS Exchange server over the last 3 days, but you can't do it. We have encrypted 5,000 of your 6,000 servers. If we do some simple calculations, your expenditure is like $50 per hour, or maybe paying $65 per hour. So in 24 hours to restore one server multiplied by the number of servers that we've encrypted is like $10 million for labor expenditure alone. I find it interesting, little side note. A lot of times the criminals know better what it's going to cost your organization to be down than the actual company or the technology department. They can quantify that often better than the business can. But I digress there. So let me keep going with the story. They continue, don't forget you spent all this time on installation and you can't even restore any data because it's gone for the next 1,000 years. They added a time factor pressure at the end of their message, but also showed some mercy at the same time. Time is ticking. Next 8 hours, your price tag is going to go up to $60 million. So either you take our generous offer and pay $28.75 million or invest in quantum computing to expedite your decryption process. A little humor there, right? When the company asked for additional time, the crooks countered by writing back, I don't think so. You aren't poor and you aren't children. So if you're effed up, quote unquote, you have to meet the consequences. A day later, when the company finally managed to get the authority to pay $4.75 million, the extortionists agreed to lower their demand to $12 million on the condition that the remaining amount be paid within 72 hours. After a few additional messages, they came to an agreement with the following things promised. Number one, the hackers would not launch any new attacks. Number two, the company would get the tool to fully decrypt the encrypted data. Number three, the hackers would completely leave the network and never target them again. Number four, the hackers would give the company access to the data to delete it themselves. The data would never be published or resold. And last, and I like this the best, the hackers would provide a full report on their actions, how they got into the network, how the attack was carried out, tips on how to improve the security program and protect against other hackers. The company ultimately paid an $11 million ransom. There's more in the story in the book in chapter 5, but lots of stories from real life situations like that. And I think to answer your question, one example is really study white papers, study your peers, understand. I mean, obviously there's best practices and checklists, but there's nothing like real true life stories to help people understand what really happens when an emergency hits.
That is awesome. I think a lot of some humor built into the story, but it's astonishing, right? When it happens, it is very hard for anyone to kind of because most of the time the leaders think that it won't happen to us. That's the biggest challenge when attack. I mean, it's like you have to be always prepared. Otherwise, when the attack happens, it's a disaster for the entire company. So that's well said, Dan. Thank you for that.